I am a Yoruba girl. The Yoruba tribe is one of the three major tribes here in Nigeria. And Nigeria is a country which was colonized by the British in the mid-19th century. She gained her independence just slightly over 60 years ago. But after such a long stay, the Brits were sure to leave some gifts behind. One of them being the gift of their language. You see, I grew up in a home where both of my parents spoke Yoruba. My grandparents spoke Yoruba, and I grew up in a primarily Yoruba state. And yet, similar to probably about half of the students sitting in this room, I cannot speak my native language, or at least not with fluency. When I was growing up, my grandmother would tell my mother, don't speak to her in Yoruba. Do you want her English to be broken? This is a tale known all too well by several Nigerian households. To fit into this world, we want to speak English and not Yoruba. We want to wear suits and ties rather than the traditional Iru and Buba. We want to be seen as global, and our native appearance is seen as too local, but not in a good sense. Slowly but surely, we lose ourselves. You see, it starts with the simple things such as language. And I'm sure sometime soon, we will forget who we are and who we were if we refuse to change our ways. But without knowing who you once were, how could you possibly plan on the person you want to become? I didn't really understand the importance of culture until I stopped living in Nigeria. When I was in year 5, my dad got admission into MIT for his master's degree. And so he decided to take the whole family along because he thought it would be a fun new experience for all of us, which it was. And so in the summer of 2017, I packed up and I moved to Boston, Massachusetts. I lived in Boston, but I went to school in Cambridge, being one out of the 4 black people in my class, and my siblings and I being the only Nigerians in the entire school. Vividly, I remember the first day of class. Every single person I spoke to had to ask me to repeat myself. If not once, it was twice, sometimes even up to 3 times. I found it ridiculous, really, because I could understand them. So why was it so difficult for them to understand me? After all, we were all speaking English, you know? After that first day of school, I worked to transform my accent. I practiced it to sound like that of my classmates. And I promised myself to never speak in my Nigerian accent again, or at least not while I was at that school. The people in my class were quite friendly, but my 10-year-old self was just not confident enough in herself, and she felt the need to change. She felt the need to betray what was hers and put up a facade. And so for over a year, I was constantly surrounded by people who didn't eat what I ate. They didn't wear what I wore, and my accent was something they couldn't seem to grasp. They were mostly pleasant people, don't get me wrong, but that feeling of being different wore me through. After a few months, I would call home only for one of my uncles to ask me why my voice sounded so different. Different? I didn't realize my voice sounded different because I was no longer conscious of it. I thought I switched my voice back to normal when I got home, or did I? I didn't realize these things because I was no longer conscious of them. I had now embedded an accent that wasn't mine and was quickly losing touch with what was. Now, I have nothing against foreign accents, but I just want you to all see how I so desperately tried to change who I was so that other people could accept me. I didn't really care much for culture until I stopped living in Nigeria. But when there's a lack of presence of something, I think we all tend to appreciate it just a little bit more than we once did. And so that year really changed my perspective on how I view my country and how I view my culture. It showed me the importance of appreciating rather than hating my culture. It showed me that we find so much beauty in the world because of the diverse array of cultures we have. If we all decided to eat the same food, wear the same clothes, and live the exact same way, there would be no diversity between our cultures. There would be no differences for us to appreciate. And what a boring world that would be. There would be parts of ourselves that would forever remain a mystery. While I was coming up with my TED Talk, I decided to do some research on my family history and that of my friends. And so I asked my father about his oriki. Now, for those of you who don't know, the oriki is a traditional Yoruba praise poetry passed down by lineage. And it's one of significant importance because it's almost seen as your ancestors praising you. And so I asked my father about his oriki, but he couldn't tell me because he didn't know. And I wondered to myself, what if the roles were reversed? What if I was the parent and my child came to me asking to learn her native language and I couldn't teach her? After all, we can only teach what we know. And if we don't make a conscious effort to practice and preserve our culture, eventually we will lose it. I think it's all important for us to understand the importance of cultural appreciation. And one step towards doing this is by learning your native language. Firstly, you need to acknowledge that you want to change your mindset about your culture to a more positive one. You can do this by consciously immersing yourself in your culture. Learn your language. Encourage your friends, your grandparents, your parents, or anybody who can speak to you in your language to speak it to you. If you have nobody else who can speak it to you, take advantage of language learning apps. There are a myriad of apps out there that you can use to learn your native language. And remember not to be discouraged by your mistakes or your mispronunciations, because it's all a normal part of language learning after all. If you were not able to take away anything from this talk at all, please take away this. Understand what makes you different. Learning your native language does not depreciate your societal value, but rather appreciates it because of the varying outlooks you now have towards life. Because with language comes outlook. After all this talking, you're probably wondering, well, what are you doing about this issue? For one, I am learning my native language. I am learning Yoruba. And I am learning more about my culture. Although I still get poked fun at from my unusual tonations, and I don't always get things right, I'm making the conscious effort to do better. If we want to have something available to us to use in the future, we must do our best to preserve it today. Thank you.